Okay, we're recording. No swearing again. And of course, by that, I mean you can swear as much as you want, but I can't swear. Well, I can swear. I don't think any of you will mind. This is atheism for Lent, so God isn't watching. Um, we're now on week three of this experiment. And, again, let me just say how excited I am, the fact that so many of you are doing this and passionately doing this and talking about it, sharing it with friends. I know some of you are meeting up with people. Some of you are looking at setting up groups that maybe happen after this event's over, where you can continue these kinds of conversations. And as always, I want to say that I really encourage that. I want to help that out as much as possible. You let me know and I will put stuff online. But this has been very exciting. I'm already thinking about what to do next year, which might be more of kind of getting people to do it themselves, which will be less financially good for me, but better for everybody, as if, people are just running this stuff for themselves. So thank you for being part of this. I hope you've been doing some of the readings. I definitely want to find out if you feel there's too much, there's too little, it's too hard, it's too easy, or the flow's not right. All of that feedback on Facebook is going to be really, really helpful for me as I try to curate this. So what I'm going to do is go over some of the stuff we've already looked at, just do a brief summary reflection on Feuerbach and Marx, because I think it's those thinkers are doing something incredibly deep. If we understand them, we'll understand what happens after them. It's going to really set us up for appreciating Freud and appreciating Nietzsche and other thinkers that we'll be looking at in future weeks. So I'll do that. Feel free, as I say, to ask some questions. There's a couple of questions on the Facebook page that I'm going to come to, but just going to again summarize Feuerbach in 5 minutes. And this is how I summarize him, and he's a very complex thinker in some ways, but you can kind of sum up the idea that he's talking about three things, which I'm going to call magic, mysticism, and theology. And he wants to account for the existence of these three things. So magic is simply the idea that as human beings, we often, like every society, you find some sort of superstition. You find some sort of way that people are trying to influence their environment. And that can be in terms of petitionary prayer, or it might be in terms of casting spells, or it might be in kind of like sacred objects. But there's this ubiquitous, or it seems like it's ubiquitous experience of being human, which is a desire to control the environment that is largely out of control. And Feuerbach explains this naturalistically. So the supernatural explanation is, of course, well, you do that because it works, because there's a God, or there are gods, or there are spirits, or the universe is designed in such a way that your thinking is connected intimately with it. And so changing your thoughts can change the universe. So those are kind of supernatural types of explanation. Somebody might disagree with the last one being supernatural, but Feuerbach wants to say, well, we can explain this naturally. And he says that when we experience the world, when we become self-conscious, so at a certain point in our history, we become self-conscious beings. And in that experience, we become conscious of our life drive, of our instinct to survive. And we also, of course, become very aware of how that is under threat by enemies, by disease, by the elements. And so what we desire, what we wish for, and this brings us to Freud actually very soon, what our wish is for some sort of ability to manipulate the world, to transform it. And, this is different now. We've got much more control over the world with science, but it's still minimal. There's still, heart disease, cancers, strokes, things that we, are relatively powerless against. And so it's a natural desire to want to control and manipulate the world. And so it's a natural tendency for all humans and all human societies to imagine there is an object that can do that. As I say, whether it's the universe, angels, demons, gods, whatever. And then secondly, mysticism. Now, by mysticism, I simply mean, the mystics who kind of get beyond magic, who do that in a minimal way, but are mostly about an oceanic experience of oneness with this completely accepting other. What in Christianity is called grace, this sense that you're accepted, that you're loved unconditionally by a force that is not corroded by death, that knows you absolutely and accepts you absolutely. And Feuerbach says that, again, when we become self-conscious beings, we realize, because we're social beings, and by that he doesn't mean, we like to socialize, but he means that by definition, to be a human being is to understand yourself in relation to a community. I mean, language is itself a social thing. You can't speak without somebody, being there to speak to. Language requires another. It's something that we do together, and we construct ourselves through our interconnection with others, which of course leads to all sorts of problems as well when we become dependent on others. But Feuerbach notices and talks about how when someone we love dies or doesn't love us back, we can feel that something in us has died, because in a sense it has, because part of them has become internalized in ourselves. Again, this can help set up Freud, because Feuerbach kind of has these ideas, but it's Freud who really expands on them and does something with them, and in one sense proves them, in the sense of like we'll get to this, but projection is something that therapists see every day in their therapy sessions. They see how we are, so interconnected with others, and there's so many issues that come out from that. When you lose someone you love, you can lose all your desire. So there's this deep interconnection. And so Feuerbach says we like to imagine that there's a being that won't die, that won't leave us, that won't stop loving us. So even if there is a real God out there, Feuerbach says we would still invent one. And if there isn't, we would invent one. It's like it doesn't matter whether there is a God or not. It's just from a purely natural perspective, mysticism and magic are two things that humans would construct. And that, so basically think about that as a screen. So Feuerbach has kind of said that's what we create, this screen out there. And then onto that screen, we project ourselves, the elements of our personality, the elements of our desires and our fears, the best and the worst of what we are, we put on that screen. And this brings us to theology. And theology could be broken down into two. There's the theology of abstraction, which is basically academic theology for Feuerbach, where you basically go, God is anthropomorphic, get rid of all the properties of God. There's this God of abstraction that's not like us, that's not anthropological, and that's the real God. And Feuerbach cleverly calls that atheism. And he calls it atheism because for Feuerbach, he says, you're left with nothing. I mean, and this is similar to Flew that you read on the first week, Death by 1,000 Qualifications, where Flew ends up saying, what's the difference between the God you affirm that's like not this and not that, it's invisible, it's not really, angry and happy and doesn't really change, isn't really deaf sometimes, doesn't really change his or her mind, isn't really a him, right? Okay, so you get rid of all of that. Well, what's the difference between that and no God at all? So Feuerbach kind of, in a sense, echoing, although previous to Flew, this idea that that's kind of atheism, that you're left with nothing. And then there's the other kind of theology, and that's what you find in the Bible. That's the God who repents, who's angry, who's frustrated, who's loving. That's the God who intervenes in wars, right? All the stuff that you see. And Feuerbach said that's religion, that's real religion. That's the religion that people are interested in, not this abstract theism. So is it Gabby, somebody called Gabby? I don't know, I'll have to look and see, where's the Facebook? Don't want to get your name wrong. Yeah, Gabby. Yeah, you were saying about what's Feuerbach's distinction between theism and religion. Now, I'd need to double check on how he uses those terms, so I don't know if this is, what the whatever you read at that moment is the same as this. But he would say, like, abstract theism is the belief in some sort of God out there beyond all the properties, the abstract God. But concrete religion, the religious life, is what you see in the Bhagavad Gita, in Buddhist texts, in the Bible, in the Hebrew text. That's religion. And he calls that anthropology. He says the secret of theology is anthropology, because what we're doing is we're projecting ourselves onto the screen that we've created. We've created because of our fear of the external world and our fear of not being loved and accepted. And then we project onto that all manner of things. And they really tell us something about ourselves. Now, this precedes the idea of projection that is central to psychoanalysis. So in psychoanalysis, one of the central concepts is that human beings project parts of themselves onto other people. So people that you admire greatly, often it's actually some part of your ideal self or your values or something that you're putting out onto them that they might not even, live up to at all. Or if you despise and hate somebody. I've got a friend who really hates this other friend of mine. Not that he knows that the hatred is something internal, but he can't help it. And what he said to me the other day, he said, "Pete, the guy just reminds me of my dad." Right? It's actually nothing to do with this other person. It's to do with the fact that what he's doing is similar to what my father did. How he acts is similar to my father. And he says, and the truth be told, those are parts of me. And the things I don't like about him are things that I can't look at in myself. That's projection. And in therapy, one of the roles of the therapist is to allow this projection to happen. Often the therapist becomes the screen upon which you project your feelings. So, you think that the therapist is judging you, or the therapist fancies you, or the therapist is bored of you, or all of these things. And some of them might be true, right? But a good therapist technically shouldn't be really feeling those things. They should be, and if they are, they should be hiding them very, very well. Letting you project what's inside you onto them. And then the therapist very subtly tries to help you see that actually what you're putting onto them is something that's inside of you. So this is one of the things that you see in therapy, but you see it in everyday life. We all do it. And we can all be aware of it at times because we've grown up in a post-Freudian world. So even if you're not Freudian, you still say things like, oh, they're just offensive. That's a Freudian idea. Or you say, well, that's just projection. It's a Freudian idea. So, it's in the popular imagination. And we know that in a sense we do this. Feuerbach is kind of saying that that's what we're doing in order to understand the essence of humanity. We're putting it out there. And that what he's doing as a type of therapist in a way is trying to make us aware of this so that we can begin to see that what we've put into God is something that is actually in us. And as we become aware of that, he thinks, just as in therapy, as you become aware of those things and make peace with those parts of yourself, you hopefully become a healthier and richer person for it. So humanity will become a healthier and richer thing for seeing that what they're putting onto God and what they think are God's attributes are a reflection of something in themselves. And he sees this as vital in human development, which is the same, by the way, as psychoanalysis, which says that, to be human is to construct yourself, is to kind of like, but be in relationship with others, but also to project and to get to know yourself by putting yourself onto someone else and then coming to know that and bringing that back into yourself. Now, the difference is, and where the critique of Feuerbach hit, is Feuerbach was saying that there is some inner essence that's just eternal that we put out onto God. And in something like psychoanalysis, you're going like, no, it's purely contingent. It's the way you were brought up. It's the culture you're in. It's the stories you were told when you were young. It's whether your parents were there or not there. A whole range of factors. So there's not some eternal essence that you put onto people. It reflects your own concrete material circumstances. And this was what Marx kind of said. Marx, and this is a question, and yeah, Jason brought this up on the Facebook, where he said Marx in the readings just basically says criticism of religion's been done, which he means kind of Feuerbach. He's done it. Now we have to move on. And in some respects, Marx felt that Feuerbach's notion of projection, of putting our internal stuff onto the divine, is largely right. And he felt that, and he says it's the beginning of critique, not the end, because he's the problem, and this is where Marx is interested. That's why he doesn't want to get into that. He's not that interested. He's more interested in changing the world through analysis of economics and materialism. But he says that we have to do what Feuerbach did politically, because now that all the theological notions that Feuerbach critiqued as really being human, we put all those onto political systems. We talk about the sovereign. We talk about the invisible hand of the market. He says there's a theological dimension to politics, and that has to be exposed. That has to be critiqued. But Marx doesn't fully go with Feuerbach, because Marx's concern with Feuerbach, as he said, like, he says, one of his other writings, which is called, I think it's Theses on Feuerbach. One of the theses is philosophers have hitherto only interpreted the world. The point, however, is to change it. And what he's kind of saying is that people like Feuerbach just go, yeah, God's like a big version of ourselves. We come to understand our own essence by looking at God. But it's just an interpretation. And Marx says, actually, we can change our world and change our essence, which, by the way, is kind of like, leads to existentialism, where existentialism says, our essence is constructed through our existence. And so, our gods do tell us who we are, but just who we are right now, just who we are in this epoch. And the point is to change that epoch, because it's destructive for so many people. So Marx wants to do that. Was there another question? I think those are the two questions that people put up on Facebook. So that's kind of the overview. I'm just going to look at the questions, see if anybody has any comments about that. Okay. One other thing I'll say, because there's not too many questions. Remember, write your questions down in the Q&A box if you want. Is there's two ways of thinking about this theologically. I mean, you can either say they're largely right. Feuerbach's largely right. And you could say he's completely wrong, but that's hard. It's hard to say completely wrong, because, in some senses, you see this stuff happening. You see how other people, their gods look like them. Feuerbach very cleverly says it's very easy to see anthropology in other people's religions, but not in your own. So you look at someone else and go, my goodness, their God looks a lot like them. But actually they're looking at you and saying, my goodness, their God looks a lot like them. So, you could try and do that, and some people have tried that. But actually, I think the two most legitimate positions are you bite the bullet and you go, Feuerbach, he's onto something, right? Other people go deeper and whatever, but Feuerbach definitely, he's onto something. But it's a critic. It's either a critique of instrumental religion. So yeah, that's not what real religion is. That really happens, and actually, that's great. Accept it, and then you'll discover a different type of faith that doesn't do all this projection, this anthropology, that's not just kind of magical thinking, but something a lot deeper. And that's what Karl Barth does. So Karl Barth says, yep, Feuerbach critiques liberal theology. Liberal theology, 100%, is just Feuerbachian. or the critique that Feuerbach offers is a critique that destroys it, destroys Schleiermacher, destroys liberal theology through and through. But then Barth says that's a clearing way to be able to talk about a different type of faith. Someone like Merrill Westphal is there as well, and it's a very legitimate position to take. And the other position is to kind of go, well, yeah, I think actually that is the explanation of why we're religious. Not everybody, of course, is religious for those reasons, but it by and large, Feuerbach opens up a natural interpretation that is, that I buy. And I think those are your two kind of places. And I think all of you who are watching this will probably, jump to one or the other. I'm sure most of you will probably be on the thing of, yeah, I think Feuerbach's saying something very important that allows a clearing away for a different type of faith. But some of you will go, yeah, I think actually that this kind of thinking opens up a radical critique of religion that it's very hard to overcome. Right? And I say, I'm tempted to say what I think at this point in that, but I think those are two very legitimate positions, and actually there's probably a lot of similarities in them. But my PhD was actually saying, how do you do theology when you take Feuerbach seriously, Marx, Freud, and Nietzsche seriously? So that's my PhD was kind of going, can you? What does theology look like? So it's either a critique of instrumental religion, or it's a legitimate kind of critique of religion in total. All right. Okay, so now I want to just spend a little time introducing the readings for this week, which are Freud and Nietzsche. We've also got Ricky Gervais's film, The Invention of Lying, in there, just because it's a heavy week. So one night this week, rent the movie. I'm very sorry that's not included in the price. If you're very upset, I'll rent it for you. I don't know how that works, but it's a funny movie. But the major readings are Freud and Nietzsche. And you will see some elements of Feuerbach in Freud. Freud, I think, really expands this stuff out, and he does something very different. Freud is not primarily interested in doing a critique of religion. He's primarily interested, obviously, in the new discipline of psychoanalysis, of kind of like doing as much as he can to promote and protect that. But he does talk about religion. He writes some books on religion, and he has some interesting thoughts on that. And wish fulfillment is very key. Feuerbach had it. We have this wish, and the wish is so strong that we create a type of illusion. In psychoanalysis, wish fulfillment is very central. The idea is actually wish fulfillment is going on all the time in us, even when we don't know it. Imagine you have a dream where your brother is drowning and there's a pane of glass, so you can't get to your brother. You're behind the glass and you're punching the glass and you're screaming out and you're watching your brother drown. Until you wake up and it's horrible and you feel terrible and you go to the analyst. I had this awful dream. Brother's dying, I'm watching, there's a glass pane that I can't break. Well, the analyst, of course, will say, is there anything that you can think of that has happened that would make you want to kill your brother? And you go, well, I don't want to kill my brother. It was a terrible dream. I couldn't get to my brother. Then the analyst can very subtly point out that it's your dream. Now, if this was happening in reality, it's not a wish fulfillment necessarily, because you're in a pane of glass, the brother's drowning, it's like terrible. But it's your dream. Your brother's in the water because of you. The pane of glass is there because of you. Now, not because of your ego, not because of your conscious self. You didn't construct this consciously, but it's come from the materials in your unconscious and in your pre-conscious, and those have come to the surface. Now, it's very hard to prove or disprove whether wish fulfillment is in a dream like that, but analysts find that very productive. what they seem to find in the therapeutic clinic, more often, not always probably, but more often than not, is that you can have a dream like that. And the part of you that hates it, that's going, no, this is terrible, is kind of like your moral compass. It's how you were brought up. It's that voice of maybe your internal parents saying, that's terrible. You shouldn't want something terrible to happen to your brother. So there's that part of you. And so that's what you remember, because that's your defense against what's a very disturbing desire, which is, that you don't like your brother, you hate your brother. But in a setting where you are not judged for that, where they're just going, right, you know what, dreams are not politically correct, right? We're just going to analyze what's going on. The person might go, well, to be honest with you, I'm really jealous of my brother. Such and such happened. My parents always loved my brother more than me. I always felt like a second-class citizen. And suddenly it all comes out. And you realize that the dream had a wish fulfillment in it that you didn't even know. But this doesn't even happen in dreams. It can happen in reality, where you can go, oh, look at that friend of mine. He didn't won the lottery and just got like this fancy car and this fancy house, and oh, the taste is terrible. He's like driving such a ridiculous car and got such horrible furniture and always throwing money around. I would never be like that. Okay. Sometimes you can hear within that a wish that the person can't face themselves, maybe because of their own moral positions, or maybe because of their jealousies or whatever. But you kind of get the sense that really what they're saying is, oh, I wish I won the lottery, not them. I wish I could have that car, not them. So wish fulfillment is often disguised, and Freud was very good at sounding it out. He was very, be fascinating to have met him. He would be one of those people who would be very good at reading you. He'd be like Lacan, the psychoanalyst. He was very good in school at ripping people to shreds. He knew exactly the thing to say to somebody that would completely destroy them. Right. So I think Freud would be similar. Don't know if he would do that, but so Freud says you can see wish fulfillment in religion for some people. Some people are scared of dying. They want to live forever. Some people are scared that no one loves them. Some people hate themselves and want someone to be there who'll accept them unconditionally. Some people have not resolved their issues with their mother and their father, and God becomes a type of substitute that allows for a type of illusionary reconciliation of those issues. And that's why, sometimes maybe somebody becomes more religious when somebody they know dies. They have suddenly a religious conversion. It's interesting that it's connected to this death of the other person. And why would that be the moment when they get this insight? And, it might be a genuine insight, but it might also be because they're terrified by what they saw. They're terrified of their own finitude, or they're terrified because they lost someone who loved them. And so, again, this is not about saying that's the reason, because there's a multitude of reasons, but Freud is pointing out that these can play an important role. And so he has this clever line that you'll read this week in The Future of Illusion, where he says that religion is like an illusion. He says it's not a delusion as such. He says it might be, but that's a personal opinion. He says, he wants to use the more objective term, an illusion, because he says illusions can be true. You could, a little girl could imagine that she's a princess. So she grows up all her life and she thinks she's a princess. And then it turns out she actually is. That, the blood samples and whatever, she was estranged when she was young, and the illusion proves to be true. But it's still an illusion. She wants to be a princess because, she wants people to maybe adore her. She wants to feel the power of being a princess, or she imagines that princesses are beautiful, whatever it is. So it's kind of like someone who is a hypochondriac and thinks that they've got some rare tropical disease, and they've thought it all their life. And then it turns out they actually do have it. Now, the person will probably turn around and say, yeah, look, I'm not crazy. I have the tropical disease. Right? But Freud would say, well, no, you're still a hypochondriac. It just happens that you were right. So Freud does say, listen, religion might be true. And he mentions it in this reading. He says, you know, the Messiah might come back and might establish a paradise on earth. But that doesn't mean that for some people, their religion is still an illusion. Even if it proves to be right, which is quite clever. So Freud doesn't want to bother proving or disproving the existence of God, and for many reasons, but the main reason, at least in this reading, is because he's going, well, even if God's real, it's still, a lot of people are still believing in God purely for wish fulfillment because of these emotional reasons, because of these extreme desires. And it wouldn't actually matter if God existed. It would just be like the hypochondriac who realizes they actually do have what they always thought they did have. You know, Freud in this reading spends a good bit of time saying, you know, the evidence isn't that good for religion. And this actually, you know, like, okay, you have to study it for yourself. But, you know, the jury is kind of out. I've read so much of that material. I used to do analytic philosophy way back in the day, and there's great arguments for and against, but ultimately it's not like proving the existence of you know, a planet behind the moon or something like that. It just doesn't seem to be at that level. The arguments seem to imply a certain belief before, you know, you actually are convinced by it. So Freud's saying, you know, there's definitely powerful emotions involved in religion, and he wants to take that seriously. So that's the reading that you'll be doing with The Future of an Illusion. And then what I want to do is, okay, see, by the way, if anybody has asked about Freud before I move on. Okay, I think we're good. There's some questions there, but I think I can go on, do a little bit on Nietzsche, and then kind of go through them, and I'll read them out before I answer them, so you can all hear them. Oh yeah, Nietzsche. Nietzsche. Wow, if you haven't read Nietzsche, you're in for a treat. Nietzsche's. You're going to love him or hate him. He's a very passionate writer. He feels he's almost a blogger before they were blogging. He writes sometimes in small segments. He's usually angry about something. He's usually got an amazing analogy. He was a total genius. And got his PhD when he was like 19 years old or something, which at that time was utterly unheard of. Even now, it's pretty much unheard of. But he hated everybody, which is one reason why you can kind of not feel offended if he hates you, because you know he kind of hates everyone. He sometimes is chaotic in his writing, and then there's sometimes these searing insights. And what you have is just like a sampling of a few readings, but he definitely is the type of philosopher that actually gets many people into philosophy when they read him, because he's passionate, he's angry, he's also can speak in such eloquent praise of life. And the affirmation of life. Like he has this parable called the parable of the eternal return, where he says, imagine you're lying in your bed one night and a demon comes to your bed and says that you have to live every part of your life again, every heartbreak, every disease, every good time and every bad time, every point that you felt you couldn't go on, every point that you felt that life was meaningless, everything. You will repeat it, not just once, but again and again and again for all of eternity. And he kind of gets the reader to think, would I despair? Would I want to die? Would I want to be removed from the world? Or could I say yes? Okay, I can do it. And if you're able to, in a sense, say in your whole being yes to that demon, you have, in a sense, found a type of salvation. You have found a way to affirm life, which doesn't mean that you say yes, like to everything that you think everything's good. Not at all. It just means that you're able to say, nothing will destroy me. So, he has these really, whoa, you read this and you go, whoa, you know. And in one of these readings, you'll come across his very famous parable of the death of God, where this man runs into a marketplace in the middle of the day crying out, where is God? Where is God? And the people gather around him, and someone says, where's God? Have you lost him? Is he a little child? Has he run away? Has he gone on a sea voyage? And in the parable, this madman throws this lantern down, smashes it, and then looks at everybody, transfixes them with his eyes, and says, where is God? I mean to tell you, God is dead, and you have killed him. And then he goes on to say, you do not know what you've done. The lightning is struck, but you haven't heard the thunder. The planet has been unloosed from its chains. We are falling, up and down, to the left and to the right, because there is no up or down or left or right. We are going into ever increasing darkness. And then he goes into the churches and he proclaims this message in the churches. So this is a very famous parable, philosophical parable, probably as famous as Plato's cave. And it's funny to try and even say anything about it in 10 or 15 minutes because so much has been said about it. But one thing that I think is important to think about when you're reading this is you'll notice that he's not talking to people who believe in God. When he says God is dead and you have killed him, he's talking to people who don't believe in God. He's in the marketplace. He's talking to the intellectual elite, the people who are the cultured despisers of religion, the ones who think they are freed from it. Now, this is very interesting. A theme that will lead to all manner of other philosophers and thinkers who have taken this and developed it in very interesting ways. What he's saying is, God is dead. And you don't believe in God anymore. Most people in the marketplace, even Christians, it's more of a cultural thing. But he says, but you don't understand how radical that is. It changes everything. It changes everything. It changes how you think about morality, life, purpose. It just transforms. And he's saying that, you don't believe, but you've still got a chosen people, like the Europeans, you don't believe in heaven, but you've still got like the heavenly realm of European values around the world. You don't have like an evangelism statement, but you still want to say, bring your values to the very corners of the earth. In other words, you're still kind of believers. You still have all of the kind of absolutes. The throne of God is still there. So elsewhere in a reading that you're not going to have, he says there's a story where after the Buddha died, his shadow remained on a cave wall for hundreds of years. He said, once God has died, the shadow of God remains, and we must abolish the shadow of God. And one of my favorite thinkers is a guy called Lacan, and he says that the true cry of atheism is not that God is dead, but God is unconscious. And my friend Tad Delay has written a very good book called God is Unconscious. That's a good introduction to what that term means. But in brief, he uses this example. I think it's Freud uses it originally, or maybe it comes after him, but it's a Freudian insight. Is that imagine you've tried to please your father all your life, and then your father dies. You're not freed from trying to please your father. You're still trying to please him, and it's even worse because there's no empirical father to say, stop trying to please me. So, and you don't even realize you are. You might be taking jobs or going out with people that, without knowing it, it's kind of the type of people that you would want your father to approve of. Or maybe you rebelled against your father all your life. So after your father dies, you still find yourself trying to sabotage your father, even though they're gone. You know your father's dead, but unconsciously your father is still alive and well, operating deep within you. And so Nietzsche's saying this about society. So one of the other readings you'll come to, Nietzsche reflects on why in our society a woman having sex before marriage is seen as bad. Which, of course, it's that he's talking about his time, although there's still lots of places in our culture where that would be seen as bad. But in the reflection, you'll read that, he basically says, he comes down to talking about obedience, that the way society runs is it wants obedience from the people. Whether it's the authorities, the government, whatever, is that they want people to behave. And one of the things that society does to do that is to use fear. And Naomi Klein has, written some interesting stuff on this in a very non-philosophical way, but politically how fear is used to control people. And we could talk about how that's used in American politics with the war on terror, with these kind of alerts. But fear, Nietzsche's saying, is a way that people are controlled. And Christianity, he thinks, was like a prime culprit of this. The Christianity would try to control you by fear of eternal damnation, fear of hell. If you don't toe the line, if you don't believe, then you're going to burn. And as society got a little bit more secular, the church had to go, right, this isn't really working. So they had to start torturing and killing people. So make it a bit more real, because the fear of hell wasn't quite doing the job. So, the Crusades, the Inquisitions, it's like, we're going to hurt you, we're going to torture you, we're going to kill you to keep people in control. If you read Michel Foucault's Discipline and Punish, you'll see he does an amazing reflection on how discipline and punishment have been used throughout the centuries and how it changes. Because, and by the way, Foucault was a big Nietzschean. So you've got you torture people, you hurt people, but then you can internalize that. So you control people not by torturing them, but ultimately then by turning their own conscience against them, where they don't want to do these things. And he ultimately says, because you don't want to be shamed. You get to a point where in society you don't want to say anything that's nasty because someone's going to dislike it. And you just want to start saying things that only please people. It's funny reading this. I was reading about Twitter today, and how Twitter is kind of making policies that look as if they might be silencing conservatives. And what does this mean for free speech? What does this mean for But the idea is that the worry is places like Twitter and Instagram and Facebook want to create a space where displeasing things aren't said. And of course there's extremes of trolling, and then there's disagreement and all of that. So there's this complex thing going on. But Nietzsche in his day is saying that we're getting to the point where we don't want to say anything that makes us stand up or stand out from the crowd. We're afraid of saying things, and we're being controlled. And then he says, this is modern Christianity. Now, you'll notice that he doesn't talk about belief in God or anything like that. He's saying that these ideas that were in Christianity have kind of seeped into the soil of society. And so people who say they're secular, they're atheists, they don't believe in God, but still have, in a sense, these structures that the church used to control people. These structures that the church used in order to kind of maintain groupthink, are still being used. And that's why Michel Foucault, he takes this idea and he says that in the modern therapeutic clinic is similar to the priest. And, society is always finding ways of disciplining and punishing people. And the ways that they do it today, they look nicer, they look cleaner, and probably we're all happy that, it's like public shaming rather than torture, right? Absolutely. But they kind of play the same kind of function. So when you read Nietzsche, you're seeing him move from an atheism that's about, whether God exists or not. Feuerbach's opening the door to that. He's saying there's wish fulfillment. It's a projection of ourselves. Freud takes that on. He explores that. And then Nietzsche's saying, and these structures and these things happen in secular society. Secular society is not atheistic enough. Which is so Nietzsche's main critique is against atheists. He would, if he was alive today, he would probably be attacking new atheism as vehemently or more so than religion, for being too theistic, for being, for not going far enough. And, the question is, where do you go if you take Nietzsche seriously? Is there a type of faith that can birth out of Nietzsche's critique? Is there something to it? And, of course, I have to say again that what we're doing in this course is just dipping our toes into lots of thinkers. You're getting a map. And by this talk, I'm hoping that you're starting to make connections between, Flew and Feuerbach and Freud and Nietzsche. And you're seeing how certain map, a cartography is being created, a certain map's being created. Because next week we then start going into theology and what the response is, but I'm hoping these connections are being made. So that's 50 minutes, which is great. What I want to do is take 15 minutes to do some Q&A. As I say, hopefully you didn't write questions in the chat box because I won't see those, but I'm going to look in the Q&A box right now, and I'm going to start at the bottom. Oh, Casey, do you have some kind of visual resource or map? That would be very useful. I remember whenever I was in a church when I was a teenager, they had these maps that mapped out everything in the Bible, and they were kind of crazy. In fact, Trip Fuller bought me one of them recently. It would be really good to have an equivalent. I think they do exist actually online, so if you check it out, but you got to be careful that they're good. But I can't recommend one as such. When you read enough of this, you just kind of see it. I love doing philosophy now because I've been doing it for long enough that I can kind of map out where most people fit. And then, of course, somebody comes in and ruins it all. Yeah. Can you explain the difference between Nietzsche's God is dead and death of God theology? Okay, yeah, very good. Well, no, actually, you know what? I'll hold that because we're going to do a week on death of God theology. But I'll just say that there's a deep connection. So death of God theology is, in a sense, a theology that takes Nietzsche seriously. No, it's not the only theology that takes Nietzsche seriously, but it is a theology that takes Nietzsche very seriously, and kind of actually sees Nietzsche as a theological thinker. This is kind of like really interesting in that Nietzsche was very pious when he was young. He wrote religious books, religious poetry. His first book, which he wrote when he was 12 years old or something, was, religious devotions. And there's a friend of mine, Bruce Benson, who wrote a book called Pious Nietzsche. It might be there somewhere. But and Bruce Benson, when he wrote that book, was a professor at Wheaton College. So, and he was arguing that Nietzsche has to be read as in a sense, within Christianity. Which I think is, very insightful. I'm very surprised that someone at Wheaton College was writing that. He's not at Wheaton College anymore. But Slavoj Žižek, did one of the kind of endorsements for the book. So that death of God theology, in a sense, sees Nietzsche as not against theology, but almost like Kierkegaard, doing something with it. Let's see. Is what Nietzsche talking about in living through all your negative experiences over and over again, similar to the myth of Sisyphus? Oh yeah. So the myth of Sisyphus is that a story where Sisyphus is punished by the gods by having to roll a rock up to the top of the mountain, and then the rock rolls down, and he has to go back down and roll it to the top, and that's his life, right? And yeah, I mean, Camus wrote a book called The Myth of Sisyphus, which I'm sure you know about because you're asking the question, but for others, and it's kind of a reflection. At least one of the parts of it is a reflection on this experience. And Camus is kind of saying, yeah, that life is absurd for Camus, and what he means by that is very technical. It's not technical, but it's he doesn't mean life is meaningless. He means that we are meaning beings, we seek meaning, and we encounter a meaningless universe. And when those two things hit, we experience absurdity. So absurdity is the confrontation between desire for meaning and confronting a seemingly meaningless universe. So he says, what do you do? And his big thing is, yes, a kind of Nietzschean affirmation of that, where you embrace it fully. And funnily enough, in psychoanalysis, they say, yeah, it's all very well saying that, but it's really hard to do it. It's easy for 17-year-olds to go, I embrace my finitude, but actually it's really hard. And you need to, have a community, and you need to do practices, and it takes a lot of work to get to that point. I wanted to write a book. I started writing it, called Sisyphus in Love, which is the idea that somehow in being in love, it transforms this task into something meaningful. That's kind of a Nietzschean idea. Julian is asking, I wonder if more Hegel should be included in Atheism for Lent. He seems to be really key behind most of these writers. That's true, but Hegel is almost impossible to read if you're not an academic. So I don't know if, Julian, if you've read him, or you're going like, why are we not reading Hegel? But like, oh my goodness, try and find a passage of Hegel that makes sense. But you're right. Like, if you're liking this course, and like if you're going, oh my goodness, I want to dive in. Okay, read some more of the thinkers we're doing. But if you're saying, I want to go really deep, then start exploring Hegel. Read a secondary source. Maybe even find a university where you can sit in a couple of classes. Whatever. I mean, that might be too much, but yes, Hegel is an important key, and I did consider putting him in, but it's like reading a different language if you're not used to it. I know some of you doing this course are philosophically trained and theologically trained, so some of you can do it, but yeah, that's kind of the reason. So let's see. How do these writers think about truth? This is from David. I feel that much of the atheism-theism divide is about what objective truth is, which seems futile. What is the place for objective truth when examining subjective experience? Yeah, let's say something about that. That's great. Philosophy, in many ways, is about a reflection on truth. What is truth? Can we know truth? What is truth? And the first thing you have to do, obviously, in philosophy is kind of like unpack the word, because we have lots of assumptions about it. What you notice in someone like Freud is a different understanding of truth. So Freud and psychoanalysts are interested in the truth, but the truth is in a sense your deepest fears and desires and wishes, where your words somehow couple with those. What's called full speech, F-O-O-L, F-U-L-L, not F-O-O-L. But my Northern Irish accent, they sound exactly the same. But full speech is where your speech momentarily couples with, your deepest fears or desires, and you have this insight. For a psychoanalyst, they would say that's, in a sense, the truth. which is similar to Kierkegaard. For Kierkegaard, the truth is not some sort of like objective, you know, being able to talk about what the very nature of the universe is, because, you know, all of these people would be perspectival, which means everything's taken from a perspective. And so the best you can hope for, and this is why science doesn't deal with truth. Science deals with coherence, with usefulness, with elegant formulas, things like that. It doesn't deal with truth because, in a sense, it deals with the idea of perspective. Nietzsche famously said, everything is perspective. And of course, the sophomore response to that is, well, that's a perspective. You know, if everything's a perspective, so is the perspective that everything's a perspective. So it kind of like falls apart. But what Nietzsche is saying is a bit deeper than that. He's saying that every perspective presupposes perspectivism. In the same way that you can't measure the dimension of space, you can only measure things in space. I can measure the table, I can measure things, but I can't measure the space dimensions. That's what I have to assume in every measurement. I can't measure the dimension of time. I can only measure because every measurement of time presupposes the existence of the time dimension. Now, there's indirect ways of getting to those dimensions, but not direct ways. In the same way, like Nietzsche's saying that every perspective you have rests on the presupposition that the world has a perspectival dimension. Otherwise, there would be no perspectives, you know. So, why am I saying that? What was the question? Oh, truth. Oh, yeah. So, you know, a lot of these people, they don't give up the notion of truth. The truth becomes a type of unconcealment, and you know, Nietzsche does something different from that. But someone like Freud is really just interested in what is your truth, which means how can you encounter your wishes and fears and traumas and desires, bring them to the surface. So it's a funny reading. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. From a Freudian analysis, what that means is know your truth, and that knowledge, that bringing to the light of day, will bring freedom. If it was scientific truth, why would that bring freedom? You shall know the truth. You shall know the number of pi, and that will set you free. Why would that set me free, right? So, and of course, Kierkegaard is similar. He talks about the truth of faith as being radically subjective, in the sense of it's speaking of one's radical subjectivity. The reason why I say that is because the thinkers you've been looking at, not the ones on the first week, but the second week and this third week, don't have much time for metaphysics. Post Kant, metaphysics is a bit dead. Like, Kant came along and famously said, when you think to the end, you end up in paradoxes, you end up in aporias, which means basically dead ends. You end up like having two mutually exclusive perspectives, because thinking can't get to some sort of objective metaphysical reality. So Kant really was so key in doing a critique of metaphysics, basically saying that there's a limit to what our minds can do, and that we cannot penetrate to some sort of objective truth. Like, Kant still maintained to some extent an objective truth that we couldn't maintain, and there's critiques of that. But after Kant, the idea of truth, you know, some people would just get rid of it, but for someone, as I said, like Freud, you can still talk about truth, but yeah, it's at a more subjective level. But I'd say Kierkegaard as well, he's deeply religious. He said like, it doesn't matter. Well, he didn't say this exactly, but it's a Kierkegaardian idea that if Jesus rose from the dead objectively 1,000 times, but didn't rise from the dead once in me, didn't couple with my subjective reality, it's pointless. You know, if someone rose from the dead and it was on TV, some documentary on Netflix, we might watch it if we were bored one night. but that's about it. It's just a weird kind of thing. Oh, somebody rose from the dead. It's a bit crazy. Lazarus rose from the dead or whatever, no Lazareans walking around. It has to be something that connects with a deepest part of ourselves. And one other way of thinking about truth is Hegel said the real is rational and the rational is real, which is a way of saying whatever is true. And you have to kind of like tease apart what it means, but truth is really what's going on. But he has taken us in a different direction. Sorry. Let's see. Okay, here we go. Thomas, quite interested in the projection idea. I'm also intrigued by a Hindu philosophy called, I don't want to wreck the name, but it says literally it means non-dual awareness, which you may know about through your research. Ad vita vadente. Do you ascribe anthropomorphism of God then to a search of separate self? If so, is God only found where transparency or unity with oneself is present? Okay, so what Thomas is saying is non-dualistic thought is kind of says that before we break the world into subject and object, there is a kind of a unity. There's an underlying unity, and either subject and object is a type of illusion, or it's a type of estrangement or alienation that is not the primary reality. So in a lot of Eastern religions, but also in the West, in Western philosophy, there's lots of people who talk about this. One wants to, religion at its truth is about getting to a place of underlying unity. Freud knew all about this. He starts off his book, Civilization and Its Discontents, talking about this. He calls it the oceanic experience. Actually, a friend of his calls it that, and he adopts it. Schleiermacher argues this. Schleiermacher, the great kind of liberal theologian, brilliant theologian, not a systematic theologian. He was more interested in speaking to the cultured and intellectual elite of his day and trying to show that there was a way of understanding Christianity or religion that wasn't doctrinal and dogmatic, but that was about having this unifying experience that he called absolute dependence. Absolute dependence, which was really where you feel yourself within and a part of and totally reliant on everything. Some people can want to go that direction. Freud wants to reject it. I actually want to reject it as well slightly. I'm very sympathetic to Schleiermacher, but I want to argue that it's actually a little bit of an illusion. I've actually just written an essay on this that's hopefully going to come out later this year. You're dealing specifically with this question, where I try to argue that separation is necessary for selfhood. And so, in a sense, when we're a self, separation is a reality, not necessarily in an objective sense, but a reality in our subjective sense. And that the key is not to try to get rid of that separation, that lack, but rather to make peace with it. And actually, my theological project, the last 3 books, have been an attempt to kind of like justify that position. However, I will say this. Schleiermacher is great. And the other alternative is to try to affirm this idea that there is a underlying unity that religion can touch. The religious experience at its best is an engagement with that. And in fact, that leads Schleiermacher to say that immortality of the soul is very un-Christian, because he said what the Christian wants is to re-enter unity with everything, to, in one sense, die, to become part of the unity. And so keeping yourself as an individual, he says, it's not a very spiritual kind of thing, and you think of it like this: when you lose yourself in a bigger cause or in love for somebody else, you can feel most alive. He's saying that in a very extreme kind of way, that we lose ourselves completely, and in that we fulfill, the meaning of life. Okay, by the way, we're at 7:05. You can click out at any time you want. I'll just go on till about 10 past, so maybe do a couple more questions. Let's see. Okay, let's see. Okay, what do philosophers actually feel about the new atheism? It seems much of them haven't deeply engaged these thinkers. The thing about new atheism, and there's actually a good podcast by Partially Examined Life guys. There's a podcast that I really like. And if you are discovering it for the first time, you're in for a treat, because there must be like 100 hours or more of good material where these three guys, and usually a guest, take a philosophical text and they talk about it for 2 hours. They're funny and they're insightful, but they do a good episode on new atheism. They make the point that new atheism is more of a political thing than a philosophical thing. The new atheists aren't trained in philosophy. They're not trained in theology. Some of them, a couple of them are, but most of them are coming from a more scientific basis. And most of them are critiquing fundamentalism. And every now and again, one of them will say, I know there's a different type of understanding of religion or Christianity, but I'm not dealing with that. And so they move on. Now, that thing they're not dealing with is massive. And there's another reason why the philosophers have not really taken them seriously, is because they're not philosophically trained. They make basic philosophical errors. They do very good science. Lawrence Krauss, for example, is a very good physicist. But the biggest problem, you could say, is scientism, where they take a methodological procedure, scientific procedure, which is methodological. It's a methodological atheism. In other words, when you encounter something, you assume there is a natural cause. That's what you do in science. As soon as you assume that there's a supernatural cause, well, you don't explain anything anymore, you stop. So there's this methodological atheism that you do as a scientist. But it becomes metaphysical atheism when you say that this procedure is something that can be applied to everything, from society to religion to love to whatever. And it's that move that causes all manner of problems. And actually, it's becoming very clear now in new atheism that some of them are falling foul of the problems that come from scientism. But you'll get first year students. It's a good first year thing. You read some Sam Harris or something and engage with it. There's a very funny dialogue between the philosopher Noam Chomsky and Sam Harris. I actually wrote about it on a blog post ages ago, but Chomsky won't even really engage Harris. And if you read it, at first you think Chomsky's a total ass, the way he's treating Sam Harris, but and he kind of is. But there's also an underlying reason that, like, Chomsky is just so frustrated that Harris hasn't done some basic readings. Now, but I'm sympathetic to new atheism, but that's because I'm a vulgarizer. I'm a vulgarizer in hopefully the best sense of the word. To vulgate, to vulgarize means to make philosophy something that can be accessible to people, to useful to people, etc., etc. And I like new atheists because they're trying to make their researches do something in the world. But I think there's people who do it much better than them. Is science the new atheist what God is the fundamentalist? Yeah, you could say, insofar as the scientific method is taken to be scientistic, to be metaphysical, it kind of functions, I think, in a similar way. And of course, the question for you, if you're watching this, is, okay, what does that mean? What does it mean to be scientistic and not scientific? And that's a big question, because it doesn't mean that you just leave room for kind of mysticism. I mean, it can include that. So you can go like, I'm scientific, but I'm not scientistic because I believe in supernatural stuff. But you can also say you don't, but you think that different things like the unconscious, for example. A scientist, the scientific way of saying things is the unconscious doesn't exist. And that's kind of true. Psychoanalysis, the conscious doesn't exist. It insists. It's an epiphenomenon, and it requires a different approach in order to access it than kind of like neuroscience is going to allows. And that's not disparaging neuroscience. There's actually really interesting debates between neuroscience and psychoanalysis, but it's also saying that there's a certain thing about the unconscious that can't be grasped because it doesn't actually concretely exist, but it also doesn't not exist. I think we talked about this in the first week. Something like society is something like that. If you take everybody out of the world, society isn't there, but society also functions in a way that makes demands on us. Anyway, getting carried away. I'll finish with this one. This is good. If I didn't get to your question, I'm sorry. It's because you asked a terrible question. I'm really joking. It's because I didn't see it. What are the practical applications of philosophy? Like Marx, I'm concerned with social change. Yeah, that's what I'm concerned with. And actually, in some respects, I moved from philosophy into political theory, which is what my master's is in, and into psychoanalytic theory, because they are theories of change, and they are, so they help us work out how change happens and why change doesn't happen. And of course, you can just read them and sit and lecture that, or you can use it to actually set things up that might make a difference. That's the latter. What I'm interested in is I don't think there's a compromise between a little bit of philosophy and a little bit of activism. I think the best, you can go so deeply into philosophy and so deeply into activism, and they mold into one. The best thinkers have often been the best activists. In France at the moment, the leading philosopher is probably Alain Badiou, and he's also an incredible activist. Whether you like his politics or not, he's this incredibly active individual, really wanting social change. So when Marx wrote, philosophers only interpret the world, the point is to change it. He was against philosophy. Freud was against philosophy. Marx kind of attacked philosophy. Nietzsche attacked philosophy. The philosophy became anti-philosophy after Hegel. Hegel is seen, and this has all changed now, but Hegel kind of was seen as the ultimate philosopher, just interpreting the world, not caring about social change. And after him came Kierkegaard, came Nietzsche, came Freud, came all these thinkers who were incredibly active in transformation. Weirdly, philosophy became anti-philosophy, there you go. Okay. Okay, Zach, you posted about finding your MA thesis a few weeks ago. Any plans on releasing it to the public? I've got my PhD thesis. I'm happy to send it to people, I think. And I'm going to try and get it published. John Caputo is currently reading it, and we're thinking of trying to update it. Caputo might write something, and I might release it next year. So watch this space. Well, anyway, we've got to 7:15. Well done. Keep talking on the Facebook page, asking questions. I'm sure there's lots of chat I might have a look at after I go. Hopefully it wasn't all saying, what is Pete talking about? I have no idea. I hope you're getting something from this. I think this week's readings are really fun. I think they're really interesting. I think they'll be food for your mind and maybe even challenging to your soul. And after this week, then we turn to the mystics. And next week, I think I said this week, Jay Baker was going to be a guest, but he's actually coming in next week now. But next week, John Caputo will be with me, and Jay Baker might be with me as well. So, and by the way, I'm going to get Caputo to do stuff because Caputo is like a world expert, and we're gonna have fun. All right. Good night. Thank you. Drink more gin.